Something just happened in Canada that the world cannot afford to ignore. On May 19, 2026, Prime Minister Mark Carney personally showed up at a remote site in the forests of Quebec, 120 kilometers north of Montreal, and broke ground on what will become the single largest graphite mine in the entire G7. The project is called the Matawini Mine, developed by Nouveau Monde Graphite, and upon completion it will supply up to 106,000 tons of graphite annually. That number sounds technical until you understand what graphite actually means in 2026, and then it starts to sound like a declaration of economic war. Let's build the picture properly because context is everything here. China currently controls an estimated 85 to 90% of downstream battery-grade graphite processing in the world. Think about that for a moment. Nearly every electric vehicle rolling off every production line, whether it's built in Germany, South Korea, Japan, or the United States, relies on graphite that has been processed in China. The anode in every single lithium-ion battery is made from it. At a moment when economies are turning to protectionism and geopolitical tension is heightening over critical minerals, China is not just a dominant supplier, it is actively restricting graphite exports. That is the world Carney just stepped into with a shovel in his hand. This announcement came just 6 months after the Matawini project was referred to Canada's Major Projects Office, a body created specifically by the Carney government to eliminate bureaucratic delay on nationally significant infrastructure. 6 months from referral to groundbreaking. In mining, that is essentially unheard of. Projects like this typically take years to navigate environmental approvals, interagency coordination, and political sign-off. Carney himself said that breaking ground was a sign that Canada is getting its resources from mines to market at an unprecedented pace. Whether you see that as bold leadership or as regulatory corners being cut depends on where you stand, but the speed itself is the message. Graphite is an indispensable component for electric vehicle batteries, energy storage systems, advanced manufacturing, and defense and aerospace technologies. With global demand rapidly outpacing supply, the Matawini mine will help position Canada as the reliable partner of choice for Asia, Europe, and beyond. That language, straight from the Prime Minister's official office, is not accidental. It is a geopolitical positioning statement. Canada is telling the world, and specifically telling Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo, that it intends to be the alternative to Beijing in the critical minerals race. Now let's talk about the economics, because this is where things get truly significant. Ottawa said the mine will create more than 1,000 jobs and attract nearly 2 billion Canadian dollars, approximately 1.5 billion US dollars in investment, as Canada pushes to expand domestic battery materials production amid rising geopolitical and trade tensions. The financing structure for this is already locked in. A financing package of approximately $645 million in gross proceeds was backed by shareholders, with costs estimated at around $474 million and commissioning projected by the end of 2028. More than 50% of capital expenses are already secured through contracts. This is not a promise on paper. Equipment is moving, workers are on site, and the clock is running. The Canadian government has also committed to purchasing 30,000 metric tons of graphite concentrate annually at a fixed price, and has committed $335 million in support, a guarantee that removes the demand-side risk that kills so many mining projects before they ever get off the ground. This is the government putting real money behind the rhetoric, and that changes the risk calculus for every private investor looking at this sector. What makes this mine genuinely different from other projects that have been announced and quietly died is the integrated model behind it. Approximately 150 kilometers from the Matawini mine, NMG's Bécancour battery materials plant will serve as the downstream conversion facility, transforming flake graphite concentrate into high-purity spherical graphite for lithium-ion battery anodes. This is Canada building not just a mine, but an entire supply chain, from rock in the ground to battery-ready material, entirely within its own borders. This end-to-end Canadian supply chain, the first of its kind, will deliver far lower greenhouse gas emissions than conventional graphite production, because the entire operation runs on Quebec's hydroelectric power rather than the coal-fired energy that powers most Chinese graphite processing. That last point is more commercially important than it might seem. EV manufacturers face growing pressure to document and reduce the embedded carbon footprint of every battery component they source, and operating on hydropower rather than coal or natural gas gives NMG's graphite a significantly lower carbon intensity than Chinese-produced equivalents. This is not merely an environmental credential. It is increasingly a commercial differentiator. Automakers in Europe and North America who are under regulatory pressure to hit emissions targets will pay a premium for graphite they can trace and certify as low carbon. Matawini is built to sell exactly that. To appreciate the significance of this project reaching construction stage, it helps to understand how sparse the global pipeline of credible non-Chinese battery-grade graphite projects actually is. Mozambique has produced natural graphite in commercially meaningful volumes, but its downstream processing infrastructure is limited and its geopolitical stability profile does not match that of a G7 jurisdiction. The Australian graphite industry has attracted investor interest, but none of its projects have reached the construction-ready status or integrated processing capability that Matawini now represents. The honest assessment is that the Western world has an extremely short list of projects capable of actually delivering battery-grade graphite at commercial scale within this decade, and Matawini just moved to the top of that list. Europe achieved a record month in March 2026 with over 500,000 EV units sold, up 37% year over year, supported by government incentives and elevated fuel prices linked to geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. Global energy storage deployment is expected to reach 350 to 360 gigawatt hours in 2026, representing continued double-digit growth. Every single one of those gigawatt hours requires graphite. Demand is not a future projection. It is a present reality that is already straining a supply chain that runs almost entirely through one country. Analysts at Bloomberg NEF anticipate a technical deficit of graphite globally by 2032. That means even with Matawini running at full capacity by late 2028, the world will still not have enough. Canada is not solving the problem. It is beginning to address it. But beginning to address it in a market this concentrated and this strategically important is itself worth billions. There is local opposition that deserves to be acknowledged honestly. A coalition formed in 2016, Coalition des opposants à un projet minier en Haute-Matawini, said it opposes the federal government's decision to fast-track the mining project. Some residents in the area worry about the mine's impact on local forests, water, and air quality. These are legitimate concerns, and they are not going away. However, the CEO of Nouveau Monde Graphite, Eric Dessonnières, said various government authorizations were required to proceed with the project, including an approval by Quebec in 2021, and that the company conducted very detailed impact studies on soil, water, and air. The chief of the Atikamekw Nation of Manawan was present at the announcement and expressed support, which carries real weight in a country where indigenous consultation on resource projects has become both legally and politically essential. Carney said, "Canada has what the world wants, and we're moving at speed to get it to market." That line is worth sitting with. This is a prime minister who spent his career at the Bank of England and Goldman Sachs. He understands capital markets, he understands supply chains, and he understands that the window for Western nations to establish positions in critical mineral supply is not unlimited. China has spent 2 decades building its dominance in graphite, lithium processing, rare earths, and battery manufacturing. The West is now in a race to build alternatives before dependency becomes irreversible. As one of North America's few large-scale, fully integrated graphite projects, Matawini will not only provide a stable domestic raw material supply for North America's EV and energy storage industries, but also secure an important position in the global critical minerals geopolitical landscape. That is not analyst hype. That is the structural reality of what this mine represents. Construction is expected to take 2 years, with the company aiming to reach full commercial production by the end of 2028. Between now and then, watch 3 things closely. Watch whether the U.S. signs offtake agreements that tie American battery manufacturers to Matawini's supply. That would be the real signal that this project has become a cornerstone of North American energy security. Watch whether China responds with further export restrictions on graphite, which would only accelerate demand for Canadian supply. And watch NMG's second project, the Watnan deposit in Quebec's Côte-Nord region, which has been identified as one of the world's largest natural graphite deposits, with preliminary assessments indicating potential annual concentrate production of approximately 500,000 tons, nearly 5 times the scale of Matawini. Canada just made a move, a big one, and the rest of the world is going to feel it.